I have 10 seconds until I'm allowed to start. Okay, so after that very exciting introduction and talking about the future, we're going to have a panel on regulation and law. Oh my God, good God. Well, but it is a future topic. It's a future that's hitting us right now. I'm Lucas Silvas. I'm going to moderate this very brief half-hour conversation. I work at the Ministry of Economic Affairs. I'm also running for the European Parliament to fix all the problems we're about to talk about. But let me introduce our wonderful panelists. We have with us today Carmen Tork, who is partner of the Pan-Baltic law firm Trinity and an expert member of various technology and law-related commissions and committees, both for the EU and the Council of Europe. So she knows the law side really well. Then we have Andrew Thompson, a Silicon Valley-based entrepreneur, health tech leader, and a philanthropist focused on freedom. Andy looks like a Brit and an American, but he actually has a house in Saaremaa and spends a lot of time in Estonia with his family who have roots here. And finally, last but not least, we have Reili Susi, who is general counsel at Pactum AI, one of, I think, Estonia's most exciting AI companies. And what we're going to do today, so AI regulation, it's not so much future as it is present reality. We have the AI Act in Europe, we have executive orders in the US, and we have pending legislation all over the world. A lot's happening. Yesterday, we had a big summit in Seoul on AI safety. We had a declaration agreed to by most of the wealthy countries of the world, or their representatives in the case of the EU. We have a lot of tech companies working to figure out sort of voluntary standards on AI safety. What we want to do today is we want to be practical and hands-on. We want to talk about what all of this means if you're starting a startup today, what it means today, what you can do about this, how you can manage some of the risks, and maybe then also talk about what might need to change as we go forward. And I want to start off with Carmen, who's going to talk about the AI Act a little bit more, what it does, what some of the key challenges for startups are, and what different jurisdictions across the world are doing the same or doing differently. Carmen, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. So yes, I will not discuss with you all of the 272 pages of the leisurely reading of the AI Act. However, indeed, EU has taken this landmark step towards regulating AI, and it will make huge difference, not just in EU, but outside as well. So, and it will have effects not only on businesses, but also users, and in the end, most importantly, the future of technology as well. So let's see, what are the main effects that the businesses will see and meet. So the Act is built on an approach of countering different risks, right? So it has graduated approach to 4 categories of different AI systems and applications. So the first one is unacceptable risk category, which means that these kind of applications will be banned throughout EU, wherever you are, whatever you do, whatever you think you are creating. So basically here we would find like social scoring systems that would discriminate against some vulnerable parts of our society. Then the high-risk applications. These are the ones that are allowed, but come with different robust obligations for risk management systems, transparency, accuracy of data, and then so forth. Here we have everything, all the applications regards to facial recognition, social credit scoring, financial services, education, recruitment, so forth. And then we have 2 lower categories, which is limited risk category, which comes with a lot of transparency obligations, and the minimal risk category. Right, there we have like code of conducts, so a lot less different obligations. And separate line in the AI Act deals with generative AI as well. A cursory look into the AI Act shows that businesses within EU will, and also the partners outside EU, we'll come to that in a second, will be caught in a hurdle of different obligations and the labyrinth of governance and then compliance. So all the companies who have applications or systems that they are developing that have AI systems, applications foreseen for the near already today or for the future, you need to prepare. However, important limb of the AI Act is actually extraterritoriality. So similar to GDPR, the same kind of rigorous legal environment will not only be hurdle for the EU companies, but any companies anywhere overseas that have clients or interests in the EU. So about users, what will be the effects of the users? Of course, the users, the underlying idea of AI Act is to ensure that users can have confidence in different AI applications that are there on the market, that they are accurate, they are human-centric, and they are trustworthy. However, in my opinion, there are two major flaws in the AI Act. I hope you will fix during the next 4 years in the European Parliament. Firstly, the AI Act is not a coffee machine. And this is a misunderstanding that has guided some of the drafters of the AI Act, meaning that, it may render a lot of the good from the AI Act totally not usable, because it is intended for a purpose. It is intended for a purpose of narrow, high-risk AI systems as opposed to general-purpose AI. Since the risk and the liabilities trigger only in case that it is related to a certain specific interest, certain specific use case, but any developer is well aware that you can always argue that this was not the intended use. It was intended for a separate use, not for facial recognition, but for something else. So this could render it very, very hardly usable. And the second, and my personal favorite, the everlasting love of the European Commission for the high fines. High fines up to 35 million euros. Well, of course, absolutely nothing. You are here in Latitude. I'm sure you can see some investors. They are eagerly trying to give you this 35 million. But to think about this, does this motivate innovation? Or does this motivate overcautiousness for any developer of AI system? And this is something to think about. And the overall idea of the AI Act is to ensure that we have innovation and it is secure and safe. However, in case of regulation and innovation, you always have to balance responsibility and progress. In this case, also ethics and human-centricness. But however, let's be clear. The future of AI is all about talents. It's all about data and talents. If you take a look at the statistics, 0% of companies in top 20 of AI and tech companies in the world are from Europe already today. 90% of AI-centric research and scientific work is from US and China. Out of 2,000 AI talents from 2023, 14% were from Europe. Will AI Act really change that, improve that? I'm a lawyer, I'm not a tech person, but I seriously doubt that. And especially taken the perspectives of US with an executive order that was just mentioned, or the China's AI governance framework, which take totally different approach to how the AI ecosystem should be. So I think the talent flight and the company's flight from EU is a serious concern we should all look out for. So I will end for now.
Well, you broached the question of the US and Europe, so it's a perfect occasion to turn to Andy. And I want to ask you two questions, Andy. First of all, you're in the health and the biotech space. It's a very definition of high risk from a data protection and a human safety standpoint. So talk a little bit about how, from a high-risk perspective, you look at these rules. You know, they're layered on top of all the rules you already have on data protection and privacy, and this is one area where the US also has very strict rules. And how does it look today? I mean, if you're starting a company today, Europe, the US, do you just go to China? How do you approach that? How do these rules interplay with the other choices you have to make on capital and jurisdictions?
Yeah, so I'll give you a very candid answer here. I have absolutely no idea. One of the problems right now is that we have all kinds of people writing all kinds of laws. These people are very, very clever. They're not very wise. In my last conversation with Mark Andreessen, which was a couple of weeks ago, you made the point that 0% of the top 20 technology companies are in Europe, and his observation was the European Union have just made sure that that's going to be permanent. So these laws are, in my view, completely ambiguous. No one will really understand them. They'll all get interpreted in the courts, and the courts will be even more unwise than the people who wrote these laws. So I think it's, frankly, very, very problematic. We already have all kinds of laws on the books that protect people from high-risk products. And this idea that we're all focused on AI safety, in my view, is completely and utterly unnecessary. I would just say to you that a single boundary condition called safety will guarantee that the potential of these kinds of technologies are unrealized. And so what would be much more important is to actually have a discussion about risk versus benefit, and to use the regulatory frameworks that we already have on the books to make sure that we balance those two considerations. We don't, in my view, need any more of this kind of ambiguous stuff that will just hand power to the courts and to, in the US, litigators. I'll make one other point here, which is what's really, really important is that these types of technologies are disseminated and able to be used very widely by absolutely everybody. Because if that is the case, then this will become intelligence augmentation, IA, and regular folks will be able to live better, more prosperous lives. If these technologies get regulated and taken over by elites, and to some extent through regulatory capture by a small number of large corporations, then this will become artificial intelligence and it will be used to replace you. And then you'll have all kinds of conversations about, since nobody has a job, because after all we've all replaced them with our artificial intelligence, we need universal basic income and la 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 la. That is a very, very bad outcome, and if you want to know what it looks like, go back to 1850 and Great Britain and the implementation of artificial muscle, which was a steam engine that was controlled by elites and by wealthy people to eviscerate the lives of the working poor. It's a very bad outcome. In America, at the same time, artificial muscle was used by individuals to improve their personal productivity and enhance their personal wealth. That's the direction we should go. And in Europe, I think it's pretty sad for you because you're in a race to the bottom on regulation.
Anything on healthcare and biotech specifically?
I don't think there's anything that you can say that's necessarily very specific. Healthcare and biotech is already very highly regulated, and so I don't think that any of this stuff actually changes the way in which you think about building out those kinds of companies. We already have to go through the FDA. We already have to go through FTC. There's so many other layers of regulation that I just regard this as it's just another layer of risk. It will definitely affect capital markets, and capital markets will be more and more afraid about the kinds of fines that you've just mentioned. I don't think it's a good thing for anyone.
Okay. Reili, can you talk about how the AI Act and legislation in the US is affecting Pactum, your customers, and what recommendations do you have? What's your daily routine as general counsel for kind of navigating through this and avoiding these risks and frankly surviving as a startup?
So those of you who don't know, Pactum is enabling our customers to conduct autonomous negotiations with their suppliers. We make it possible for them to conduct simultaneously thousands of negotiations and make a better deals for both of the sides. At this moment, well, first of all, Pactum is a US-based company, and the AI Act is a European legislation. However, we are affected because our services are also used in Europe. So that means we are in scope of the AI Act, and that means we have to invest into resources to properly unpack the regulation for ourselves and to conduct the applicability and impact assessments. Luckily, currently, based on the preliminary assessment, our understanding is that we will not fall into the scope of high-risk AI system, which is good for us, because as you know, the high-risk AI system brings along very strict rules and requirements that would need to be met. We currently believe that we fall into the category of limited risk AI, which basically means that we have transparency obligations that we have to meet. Basically, we have to inform our customers, or actually the users of the system, that they are interacting with AI system. However, as you know, especially in tech startups, the products evolve and change rapidly, right? So this isn't a one-time exercise. This is a continuous resource that we have to put into continuously evaluating what we're doing. That means, of course, we have to map all the AI systems that we have, both the ones that we provide as well as those that we use internally. We need to evaluate the risks of those systems properly, and we need to categorize them in line with the AI Act. Of course, we also need to document the risk governance system and enhance it. I think one of the challenges that we see with our customers is that they, of course, are informed of the evolving regulations, and what we've seen is that some of the customers, although we're not in scope of the high-risk category AI systems, the customers have started to apply the high-risk AI system requirements on us through contracts, which isn't ideal for us. And of course, when that happens, then we have to have the discussions, but it slows down the process for us, which isn't great. The second question, how to navigate as a startup the environment. Honestly, if you are a high-risk AI system provider and you are a starting startup, I don't know how you survive this, because the compliance cost is just very high if you look at all the requirements that the AI Act provides. I do recommend you to start looking at it as soon as you can. I do think that there needs to be, you probably potentially need to raise capital for the compliance purposes. It's not easy to navigate the environment right now. And also, if your services are available not only in Europe, but for example in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, you also need to look at those regulations in those markets, which makes the environment very complex for a startup.
So I'm going to say this is a pretty devastating assessment. We've got 3 panelists more or less unanimously saying the AI Act kind of sucks and it's going to hurt a lot of business in Europe. First of all, before I get to my questions, and I can monopolize these 3 very smart folks for the next 10 minutes, future.votemo, that's VOTEMO.eu, is the URL to add your questions. So please, 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 and ask some questions. And while we're waiting for you to put your questions into Votemo, I'm going to ask, is there anything positive in the AI Act that any of you see? Is there anything that, compared to what other jurisdictions have done, that you would bring as a positive element?
Well, if you're a large US tech company, it's absolutely fantastic. Rayleigh here just pointed out that if you're a startup, you're going to have to raise a lot of money for compliance. Who's a VC in the audience and who wants to invest in that? Okay, so what she's just described is the perfect scenario for the large and dominant US tech companies to become ever larger and ever more dominant. So that's a great thing. Thank you, Europe.
And how do we fix it? I mean, is this a kind of rip and replace type thing? Or are there tweaks? You know, maybe we get the guidelines and the technical standards to be specific enough that the compliance gets easier. Is there a path where in the next year or two, with the right kind of pressure within the confines of the AI Act as it is, we make things better? Or is the ideal scenario that we say, thank you very much, dear legislator, please try again and copy X? And then my question is, what is X that we want to copy?
We don't have an X, unfortunately. I mean, from my perspective, the ideal scenario would be if there would be like a harmonized regulation across the globe, because currently what's happening is that, yes, the EU or Europe will have a single set of regulation, but if you want to offer the services globally, you know, the requirements become very complex. Everything becomes very fragmented. But unfortunately, we will not get a harmonized regulation. I mean, it's pretty impossible.
So if I just take that point, I think what's really important to understand here is that the Chinese are laughing all the way to the bank, because they aren't going to comply with any of this stuff, right? China's a very different ballgame. Lucas mentioned that we have a foundation that invests in freedom, and we have been investing extensively for the last 5 years on this idea of digital technology and the future of freedom. These technologies are going to redefine our lives socially, politically, economically, and most especially militarily. And it's really, really important, if we want to sustain any kind of life in the West, that there is freedom to use these technologies, not just by big corporations and governments, but by everybody. Because the Chinese will use them, and they will use them to conduct what I'm going to describe as full-spectrum warfare. TikTok is a Chinese weapon. So, it's a PLA-controlled entity that's being used to distort and shape public opinion in the West. I could go on and on and on about this, but we, I think, exist at a time of existential threat created by these technologies. And what's really, really important is we realize that it's important that they get used, they get exploited, and the benefits from these types of technologies are fully realized by people in the West.
But I think there's one more, actually a big positive for all the businesses in the sector. If you take the world, and you have an Asian approach and you have a US approach, both of which are very much into, giving funds and then really boosting the sector. Europe has knowingly taken the other direction to have a human-centric and trustworthy AI. And this is actually, maybe not in a really long run, but at least in a medium run, this will be a competitive advantage to European companies, because these are the companies who are developing their applications in this sector, in this legal environment, meaning that they are the only ones who can actually say that, well, we have a bulletproof AI application that actually puts the human, the user first. So it is a competitive advantage if you take it like this and you turn it to your own use.
I know you're trying to put a positive spin on this. Andrew, Aureli, do you see any truth in that, or do you think it's just...
So, yes, there's real truth in that. When we talk about digital society and the future of freedom, I make 3 broad generalizations. There's one model that's called algorithmic autocracy. That's China and many other countries that use these tools to centralize power as much as possible. Then there's a more laissez-faire approach, which is in the United States, which is more or less about corporate surveillance, and that's designed mainly to drive corporate profits. There's one country that has used digital technology to empower its citizens, and the best example is Estonia, where you've built and delivered digital services that are very, very citizen-centric. That's a very, very good model. And back to your point about how do you then ensure that citizen-centric models actually stay at the core of this? And the answer is, let your citizens design them, right? Don't hand power to corporations and don't hand power to governments. Hand power to the people in your country. That's my firm belief.
So
that's
I finally
the
have
future
some
of freedom.
questions, and some of these are quite practical. There's some questions about the fines. So if an AI tool is released that is marketed for a non-restricted reason, but a customer uses it in a prohibited manner, who pays the fine?
Well, just as said, the AI system is not a toaster, even if AI Act thinks it is. So if you're a developer and you say that your intended use is for X and your users and deployers use it for something totally different, there's a very good possibility for you to say that if your guidelines to your deployer were clear and the deployer overstepped those, then you are in a very good place to say that no liability should follow. But of course, if those guidelines that you as a developer give to your deployers are nonsense or seen to be a circumvention tool, that's of course another story.
Anyone else?
I agree.
So a second practical question here really concerns early stage startups and micro entrepreneurs. Let's dig a little more into the practical strategy, situation being as it is. And it should be noted, the AI Act is not yet fully enforced. Different provisions come into force in the next 12 and 24 months. what are the practical steps you can do now to at least lessen some of the pain if you are in Europe or you have European customers?
Start to get acquainted with the regulation and do the assessment. You need to assess your own AI systems that you will develop or provide and categorize whether you fall into hopefully you don't fall into the prohibited category, but if you fall into the high risk, you then need to plan for that regulatory burden that you will face. And it's not going to be a quick fix. It's a lot of work. So yeah, the sooner you start looking into this, speak with industry experts, engage in industry collaboration, industry groups, sign up with law firms' newsletters, attend their conferences, just get the information that you need in order to do the assessment as early as possible.
You know, we have a question here that maybe raises a broader point, which is, if you read what the AI Act tells you to do, they're not necessarily all bad measures. It's a list of things that actually, if you're going to develop a good ethical AI system, in principle, you should be doing anyways. A lot of good practices, data governance is mentioned in this question, documenting what you're doing, having certain methodologies for your testing. So that's not the problem. You read the first few articles and think, of course I want my AI companies to do this. The problems come in all the documentation requirements, the fines which have been mentioned here, the uncertainty. So I still want to come back to the question of, if we're going to go and make things better, and if we're not going to quite just, throw it all out and deregulate everything, what are the tweaks or the rewrites that we could make so that the measures we do want companies to be following fit into a legal framework that encourages them to do the right thing without penalizing them for not having an army of compliance lawyers?
Well, I think there are two things that you can do. As an Estonian, it's easy. It was already said by a co-panelist here that, well, we Estonians, we tend to have a way to see how to do things, even if you have regulation kind of limiting your options and possibilities. And the second thing is what I always tell my clients, if it's a question of compliance, be creative. The more creative you are, just as with personal data protection, be creative in showing what you are doing, why you are doing. Because the more creative you are, the more probable it is that you are a diligent business that is allowed to do what you are doing.
Andy, Reilly?
I think there's a real question about enforcement. And so, look, I work in healthcare and life sciences. In the US, we have a very heavy regulatory regime, both for drugs and for devices. It's very complex. It's extremely expensive. If you wonder why medical products are either unaffordable or only available in the US, it's because of the regulatory regime. In Europe, for example, for medical devices, you have a notified body system. And there's TÜV in Germany, there's BSI in the UK, etc. They can be much more discretionary and much lighter touch with respect to how they enforce those kinds of regulations. And so that is a better system. And rather than necessarily thinking about where you go with respect to rewriting the law, it's probably a good idea to think about what kind of institutions do you want to set up to police and enforce so that it becomes a manageable regulatory regime.
Mm-hmm.
Final thoughts, lady, and then we're kicked off the stage.
I think just as a closing remark, one fix that I would have liked to see in the regulation would have been the lighter regulation for startups. Requirements that align with the size and resources of companies, just to make the startups, the growing phase more simple until you end up in a certain size. And then, of course, you get the most heavy regulation. That would make sense.
Great. We've got a concrete action plan for the legislators. We've got a very clear set of instructions for the startups, which is, do please stay in Europe and read the AI Act. And then maybe hire Carmen if you really need to. So thank you. Give this panel a big round of applause.